started. So Jim Bartolino is a hydrologist with the USGS here at the Idaho Water Science Center, and he's been working with a few other folks at the USGS as well as the Department of Water Resources on creating a hydrologic model for the Treasure Valley, and his specific part has been focusing on the hydrogeologic framework for it. And so I will pass it off to you, Jim.
Okay, let's see. Okay, do you guys see just the slide or do you see the other stuff?
I also see the speaker notes slide.
Okay, I'm going to do that. There, is that better?
Yep.
And do you see your the bar with you guys on it over at the side?
Nope, we don't see that, but we do see your mouse, so that's useful.
Okay, good. Yeah, I made a huge mouse. Well, let's see. I'm Chip Bartolino. I work for the USGS 30 years now. Today I'm going to talk a bit about the Treasure Valley groundwater flow modeling project. I'm going to hop around for a bit, kind of tell you how the study came about, how the hydrogeologic framework, which is primarily my bit of the program, and then kind of touch on some of the modeling stuff. So if I jump, so kind of how we got here. As you all know, we live in the Treasure Valley, and the place has been growing like crazy. In 2017, about 41% of the population of Idaho lived in the Treasure Valley, including, well, this expanded area, which is probably bigger than the traditional Treasure Valley. We all know that population in the study area has blown up. We had 313,000 people in the valley in 1990. There's 702,000 as of 3 years ago. Compass thinks that in their projections that we'll hit over 1 million by 2040. At the rate we're going, I don't think it's going to take that long. This is the map of the study area. You can see that it's here in orange. I'll talk a bit about that in more detail. Another characteristic of the valley is that most, not all, but most of the domestic and municipal supply water is from groundwater. So like many Western cities, we're pretty heavily dependent on groundwater. So what does this growth look like? Our model period is 1986 to 2015, and I'll come back to that as well. But this is that same map of the study area, and we see here irrigated lands is kind of this blue color. The orange color are semi-irrigated lands, which is primarily urbanized land, and then the yellow is non-irrigated land. This is as of 2015. Well, IDWR put together snapshots of what the irrigated land status looks like for 8 years out of the 30-year model period, starting in 87 and going through 2015. So I could step through all these maps. I don't think it's all that useful. What's more useful way to look at it is this bar graph. So again, the blue is irrigated land. So you can see from 1987 to 2015, it slowly declined by about 100 square miles. Conversely, the semi-irrigated land increased about 100 square miles over the same time period. The non-irrigated land more or less stayed the same. So that kind of makes sense. You know, a lot of that is BLM land, these large chunks north of Parma, kind of this interfluve between the Boise and Payette Rivers, the Boise Front, as well as all that BLM land, birds of prey in the Air Force Base down to the southwest. So we can see pretty obviously that we're urbanizing the irrigated land. Another kind of point that a data point of where I'm trying to get to on this is the Palmer Drought Severity Index. And the Palmer Drought Severity Index is a drought index. It's probably the most commonly used one. There are others. Here we see the PDSI from 1900 till essentially 2019. The further we are below the line, the drier it gets. As we go above the line, it tends to be wetter. This -4, at -4, we hit extreme drought. So that's this line right here. So if we look at a well-known historic drought period, say the 1930s, we can see that we had two periods that got fairly dry for multi-years. There was a wet year in the middle of it, but by and large, you know, we had pretty dry conditions. If we pop over here, though, and look at the 30-year model period, I'm sorry, that button's on. We can see that we've got several periods, you know, again, -4 is extreme drought. We've got several multi-year periods that are completely dry drought conditions. So, you know, we can see that we're headed into a period that we haven't seen before in the 20th century. Now, the PDSI has been reconstructed back 2,000 years, and we see these kinds of long droughts in the historic record in the past 2,000 years. But as many authors have pointed out, you know, the 20th century was pretty wet, and we've made a lot of our water allocation decisions based on that. So that brings us to Senate Concurrent Resolution 137, and this was signed in 2016. And essentially, this resolution basically told the Idaho Water Resource Board to address statewide aquifer stabilization and sustainability. So if we go down, this is a several-page document, but if we go down into it, it specifically mentions the Treasure Valley. And it told the Idaho Water Resource Board to conduct aquifer recharge studies and develop a groundwater flow model with all the necessary measurement networks for the Treasure Valley aquifer. So that's kind of how we got here. So that brings us to the question, why would we even bother building a model? Well, first of all, it's a great way to integrate the hydrologic and hydrogeologic data at a given point in time. You know, if you will, a super database or snapshot of the hydrogeology. Next, groundwater flow models have become the standard for decision making on water resources, particularly in the West, but throughout the whole country. And you know, Idaho in going to conjunctive management, I mean, we're on the forefront of using models and conjunctive management compared to most of the rest of the West. So how do we use it for decision making? Well, we can use it to answer what if questions, which comes under the category of water management. And these are things like planning scenarios and that kind of thing. We can also use it in terms of water rights administration and where we go to quantify hydrologic impacts. And certainly on, say, the Eastern Snake River Plain model, there are water rights administration questions being made all the time on the basis of that model. And then finally, we were told to by the legislature. So how did it come for the USGS and IDWR to collaborate on this? We have basically the Water Resource Board tasked IDWR with getting this done, and IDWR came to us, and first of all, they viewed us as unbiased with a reputation of quality science, as per our mission. But by their involvement, it allows them to meet our mission goals of understanding the water resources of the United States, as well as them to have features in the model that they can use for both the administration and management purposes. Another reason that is that we have a history of successful collaboration on groundwater flow models. First, there was the Spokane Valley Rathdrum Prairie model that we finished in 2007. We finished a groundwater flow model of the Wood River Valley in 2016, and now we're working on the Treasure Valley. So, you know, we've got a lot of trust between us, and there's some pretty darn good scientists on the team. The University of Idaho is also a partner. They have their primary role, and this is Rick Allen's group at Kimberly, have primarily developed the evapotranspiration estimates for the groundwater flow model using the metric application. And this is what IDWR uses in their Eastern Snake River Plain model, and we used on the Wood. One of the unique things, you know, that probably wouldn't have happened 30 years ago when I went to work for the survey, is that IDWR forms a modeling technical advisory committee, the MTAC, who help guide model development. And they did this for the Eastern Snake. We did it Spokane Valley. We did it for the Big Wood. And essentially what the project scientists do is quarterly we get together, kind of make presentations on various aspects of putting the groundwater flow model together. For instance, how we're going to handle ET, New York canal seepage, whatever, and get input from the group. And sometimes that's, oh, I've got a data set that'll help you with that. And another one is, well, I don't think you should do it that way because X, Y, Z. So, you know, these MTAC meetings are really useful for keeping everybody in the loop as we go along, so nobody's blindsided when we get done. Well, that brings us to the aquifer system and the hydrogeologic framework. Here's another map of the enlarged study area. The first real model of the Treasure Valley, and I'm speaking here of models that cover large areas of the Western Snake River Plain, not more like site-specific models. So Garth Newton in 1991, as part of the USGS RASA program, put together a groundwater flow model of the Western Snake River Plain. And you can see it here outlined in green. He went all the way up from the Weiser, well, to Payette, the Payette River, used the snake for part of the model boundary, and then down below King Hill to the junction with Salmon Falls Creek. So he obviously had a lot more undeveloped, non-irrigated land in his model. The next major model of the Western Snake River Plain was by Christian Petrick, which was put out in 2004. And Christian's study area was the lower Boise River Basin. We can see Christian's study area here in yellow. Basically his, yes? The southeastern boundary was this groundwater divide that we can see on water level maps, even though there's, you know, then there weren't a lot of points. Christian used the Snake River for his southern boundary and his western boundary, and then came along the kind of the divide on the interfluve between the Boise and the, well, he included the lower Payette, but primarily kind of cut off all this Boise, basically the Boise Mountains on the northern side. So all these years later, I'm sorry, let's see, all these years later, Jennifer Johnson with the Bureau of Reclamation was working on a model of the Treasure Valley, and her model area was more or less the same of Christian's. And I misspoke. I said Christians went to the Payette. Christians did go to the interfluve. I had it right the first time. But at any rate, Jennifer was going to use basically Christian's model area, but IDWR has seen a lot of development up in these areas and water rights applications, and then over here, the Orchard Mayfield area as well. So they gathered some additional data, expanded the water budget, and Jennifer expanded her model area beyond Christians. For the current study, we're pretty much using Jennifer's model boundary. So what does the groundwater budget look like? Well, if we look at inflow or recharge to the aquifer, two components make up the vast majority of the inflow into the aquifer. This is canal seepage, which is 48%, and our total on-farm infiltration, which is both deep percolation of irrigation water and precipitation. So between those, that makes up 94% of the water budget, which is not to say that these other components are not important, but by and large, these are the big fish we have to make sure we get right. If we go to discharge or outflows from the aquifer system, we go down here. If we look at the two main components, we've got groundwater discharge to drains and groundwater discharge to rivers. So between them, that makes up 84% of the discharge from the aquifer system. If we add the pumping, all types of pumping to that, basically we've accounted for 98.5% of discharge from the aquifer system. So you can see that we've got fairly few components that make up a large portion of what's coming in and going out of the aquifer system. This was a water budget done by Artie Schmidt and others. This is pretty much what Jennifer used, and then I mentioned IDWR went out and collected some more data for Jennifer to expand her model area, and that's what Jennifer Succo put out in 2012. So this is a combination of those two. And I might just, we all know this, but looking at water budgets for different models, you have to be very, very conscious of what the model area is and what it includes. Like I mentioned, Garth went all the way down to Salmon Falls Creek, which includes a lot more non-irrigated land. Okay, well, we get to my bit of it, and that would be the three-dimensional hydrogeologic framework model of the aquifer system. I put this together on using data from 291 wells. And we see here in this map, that's all these little black circles. I basically selected wells kind of at random. A lot of times I might have to root around because for whatever reason, there was a problem with the well or the log. You can see we've got pretty good coverage. This BLM land north of Parma, we've got kind of a hole in here, and some of this up on kind of the divide area. And then especially we go down here and we've got all of this BLM land. Part of that's birds of prey, and then we get into the various sort of testing ranges. There just simply aren't any wells down here. So, I could put a dragon on there and say, here be dragons, but USGS editors kind of cut me out on that. At any rate, we put this together with RockWorks 17, which is the latest version of RockWorks. And we're going to use this hydrogeologic framework to give us hydraulic properties for the groundwater flow model. Okay, what do the hydrogeologic units look like that the hydrogeologic framework model is based on? Well, from what we know of the geologic history of the Western Snake River Plain, I divided the aquifer materials into 4 units based on the lithology and depositional environment. So if we go back, this is kind of a hybrid diagram. Basically, as the Western Snake River Plain started subsiding, we have basement as in some places as Idaho batholith granite. We've got the older units, the Columbia River basalt, and then we've got assorted volcanics, which are primarily rhyolites. Well, as the Western Snake River Plain continued to subside, we had the first big lake form in the basin, and this was been named the Chalk Hills Lake. So as one would expect, within a lake, the lacustrine sediments are primarily fine-grained silts and clays. Now around the edges, we've got alluvial fans and deltas where various assorted streams came in from the high country surrounding the plain, and so we've got some coarser grain sediments around the edges in these Chalk Hill Lake deposits. Well, at one point, the Chalk Hills Lake drained and sat empty for several million years, which created an unconformity. There was some deformation, so a lot of places this unconformity is expressed as an angular unconformity. Well, at some period in time, the Lake Idaho, the basin filled with Lake Idaho. Again, we have predominantly silts and clays being deposited with these marginal alluvial fans and delta, these coarse grain deposits kind of around the margins. We also had basalts in the upper part of these sediments. We had some basalts erupted, and many of these early basalts are definitely subaqueous. We see pillow basalts and that kind of thing. Well, at some point, Lake Idaho found an outlet down in the Hells Canyon area. Spence Wood has done some work on this, and the Snake River became flowing through the basin, much like the Rio Grande River and the Santa Fe group deposits in New Mexico and Colorado. At this point, these basalts continued erupting, but all of a sudden they become subaerial, and we see typical lava flows and that kind of thing. So after Lake Idaho becomes through flowing and begins to drain, these alluvial fans and deltas basically start depositing these coarser grain materials further out on top of these fine-grained Lake Idaho silts and clays. So we have these sands and gravels in the upper part of the aquifer system, and then we have things like the 10-mile gravels and various assorted episodes of deposition and downcutting by the Boise River. So what are these four units then that I came up with? Well, first of all, there's these coarse grain fluvial and alluvial deposits. These are primarily in the upper part of the aquifer system, as we can see from the geologic history, even though there's obviously parts of them interfingered in some of these deeper fine grain units. Next, I defined a basalt unit, and these are primarily the Pliocene and Pleistocene basalts that we see, in this upper part of the section. But when I got into the northern part of the study area, there's a lot of Columbia River basalts that are sitting either directly on top of the Idaho batholith granite or some of the older sediments in the basin. The IGS is working on kind of sorting out the lithology in that area north of the Payette River, and they should bring some clarity to that kind of murky question. But at any rate, in a driller's log, it's really hard to tell the different basalts apart. I couldn't tell if they were Columbia River basalt or these younger basalts. So again, I'm working from driller's logs, which are not the most ideal tool. So essentially, I assign these basalts to this basalt unit. Next, we have these fine-grained lacustrine deposits, the Chalk Hills and the Lake Idaho deposits. And finally, we have at the base, we have granitic and rhyolitic bedrock. Even though if you go, some places, especially along the Boise front, you'll see, sediments in between these rhyolites and granitic units. Part of the problem in driller's logs is when you see something called granite, It could be rhyolite, it could be a granite gravel, it could be any number of things. So, you know, driller's logs are what we have, but sometimes they're not ideal. Well, this is what the hydrogeologic framework looks like. This is a fence diagram, and here we're looking from the southeast to the northwest, kind of up by Ontario and Payette. Basically, the model, I constrain the bottom of the model is 500 feet above sea level. The top of the model is at 4,500. I called it at 4,500 feet. You don't see a crop up here because of I didn't throw a fence through there. So anyway, this definitely covers the part of the aquifer systems that's used. So, you know, one thing that's really noticeable about this, as you know, as our geologic history suggests, you know, the lower part of the aquifer tends to be primarily these fine-grained lacustrine deposits. And as we go up and have these various sands and gravels, which would actually form where most of the domestic wells are completed in the valley. We get off down towards birds of prey, and we see these Pleistocene basalts. And then towards the Boise front, you can see we've got these bedrock units. Again, you know, there's some uncertainty with this, but you know, certainly we see granites and rhyolites. So I'll come back to this in a bit if we have time. That brings us to the groundwater flow model. The groundwater flow model is approximately the same as Johnson's 2013 model. We have 1 month stress periods for the 30 years, which brings us to 360 months. Tentatively, we're planning on 1 square mile cells because that's the resolution that we currently feel supports, the data supports that size cell. Right now, again, tentatively, we're looking at, Stephen's looking at 6 model layers, and the hydrogeologic units and the hydraulic properties are going to come from the 3D hydrogeologic framework model that I did. The model code we're using is ModFlow 6. That's the latest version of ModFlow, and ModFlow 6 really was rebuilt from the ground up, so it more efficiently integrates some of the packages that were kind of kludged on over the years, as well as it allows you to do things like parent and child models within the run. So it's going to add a lot of capability to the model. Right now, we're on course to have this model done by the end of next year. So one thing that's kind of unique that we're doing is how we're defining our model layers. So you saw the hydrogeologic framework, how kind of spotty and discontinuous it is, as most alluvial systems are. And we just, you know, didn't feel good about doing model layers based on those. So what we have 1,400 wells with 1 or more water level measurements between 86 and 2015. That's our 30-year model period. So, and we've got 30 multi-level wells, or actually nests, in that 1,400. So by looking at the screen intervals and the proximity of wells, we were able to come up, Stephen Hunt put together a diagram that looks like this, and these are the screen intervals in wells. This is a given cross section. And you can see that the screen intervals pretty much allow us to go through and define model layers based on the screen intervals. So that's what we've done. So to look at that in a little more clear diagram, what Stephen has done is he's taken these primarily coarse-grained sand and gravel deposits and draped that over under the land surface. Again, these were most of our wells are, and this is mostly an unconfined system. But then when we get below that, using that well interval layering, Stephen defined layers that are more or less based on elevation and the screen levels. So you can see right now he's showing 7 layers. This is an older diagram. We pretty much cut it down to 6 by combining some of these. So the top of our mudstone facies is essentially layer 7, and then below that we have the bedrock. Again, this is all tentative, and this is still a work in progress, but it looks like this is pretty much where we're going. So we have time. So as part of the hydrogeologic framework, I put together a animation showing various ways to look visualizations of the hydrogeologic framework. So if we step through this, we've got the fancy title. We've got our location map. Here's a map of the study area that we've already seen. So this is taking the whole solid model of the aquifer system and slicing down through it to the base of the model, which was 500 feet. And again, this is the same view. We're looking southeast to northwest. And again, you notice, the lower parts of the aquifer, finer grained. We've got the basalts that predominate on the kind of the southern side. If we take the same model and we slice it from east to west, again, you can see these basalts to the south. We can see these fine grained deposits in the lower part. We can see these bedrock units. And as we go to the northwest and the deeper parts of the aquifer system, you can see that it becomes finer and finer, is pretty much what you'd expect in the deeper portions of the lake. So we go ahead and we can peel that back. I should have put some scary theremin music or something like that in the animation, but instead you have to listen to my narration. And again, as we move back to the east, we see these bedrock deposits along the Boise front, and then these various assorted basalts. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing and peel from south to north. Now, because I used a number of wells of various and assorted depths, and as we all know that the deeper we get, the fewer wells we're going to have. I mean, certainly there's more uncertainty the deeper you go in the model. But again, I'm fairly confident about this model representing more or less what we know about the geologic history of the basin. So, when we calibrate the model, we'll have a good idea to see, if this is really a pretty good representation of the aquifer system. So we finish building it off to the south. And then finally, what we do is I do some rotation views. So we're looking at a map view and we're turning it so we're looking at it directly from the south on the side, and then rotating it around a vertical axis. So this is kind of we're getting to the east and starting to look across the boundary with the Boise Mountains, the Boise front. We can see as we go off towards the west and get more into the inner fluve area, we've got the primarily sands and these clays. Pivoting around now, so we're looking at the boundary with the Snake River. Again, the lower part of the basin, we see these predominantly these fine grained deposits, and then these primarily younger basalts along the southern boundary. With that, our products have been a USGS fact sheet that Sean and I authored that came out in 2017. It's available on the USGS Pubs Warehouse. Next, the report with the 3D hydrogeologic framework was released in January of this year, along with the data. So this first link is to the Pubs Warehouse and the report itself. The second link is to the USGS data release, and basically the USGS data release site archives all these data sets with high quality metadata. There's three parts for this report. First of all, there are the data from the 290 well logs I used, lithology data, screen interval, water levels, location, that kind of thing, as a CSV file. Secondly, there's the model itself, which is a XYZ CSV file. There's over 1 million nodes in the hydrogeologic framework model. Again, it's in CSV, so you can pull it into RockWorks or Earth Vision or even Global Mapper or ARC. And then finally, the third component is that animation that I just showed you as an MP4. As I mentioned, model release is planned for the end of next year, and as far as I know, we're on track. The hydrogeologic framework was pretty much my gig, and Stephen Hunt is the master modeler that's actually putting this together. So I think we're coming out with a pretty darn good model. Here are the email addresses for Sean and I. Both of us are working at home, quite a bit. So it's easier to get hold of us by email than on the phone. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions or comments.
Thank you so much, Jim. That was a great presentation. And if anybody wants to, you can unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can also type one in the chat window and we can relay those as well.
I have a question here, if you can hear me.
Yes.
This is Richard. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very interesting. So here's just kind of a general interest kind of question. Growing up along the base of the foothills, kind of out towards northwest Boise Eagle, I used to, climb up a couple hundred feet up into the foothills, and I was always very confused about these cobblestones, that I would find that look like river cobblestones, right, up in the foothills, in the gullies, and I didn't know about Lake Idaho back then. But my kind of larger question is, I was trying to look as you're moving north-south through the transects. Is there kind of a distinct line there in terms of alluvial versus the silt as you get, leave the valley floor and move up into the foothills? Was that fairly clear, or and does that form a distinct line essentially?
Well, I mean, no, you still have these interbedded sands and gravels within these lake sediments, but it's primarily this finer grain stuff, along with, and some of that's actually probably colluvium instead of strictly alluvial deposits as well. Does that help?
Yeah, I think so. So it looked like on your profiles in your animations there that what I could kind of think was more or less the foothills showed more upper elevation, coarser grained material, but maybe I wasn't looking at that right. So I guess do you think that was more or less what I was seeing there, corresponding to the foothills, the lower foothills, or?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah. Okay.
Keep in mind that's on the other side of the basin bounding fault as well.
Mm-hmm.
So some of this, it's much higher than what we see, within the basin itself. But also, I mean, if you think about it, when you drive to Emmett and you get to the top of Freezeout Hill and you start down into Emmett, you've got this pretty good section of sands and some gravels in there as well. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we see.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. Yeah. Nice presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Jim, this was a great presentation and a tremendous amount of work going through those logs and a reasonable looking model. This is Virginia Gellerman from IGS. I was wondering if you were going to include faults in your model or what role you think they might have in groundwater flow.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I was pretty much counting on somebody to ask that question. I struggled with faults a lot, and I think, I mean, they are significant in places, especially along the Boise front, which is basically the edge of the model anyway. In a lot of places, the faults are covered, or they're kind of inexactly placed, and they don't show up as well. So, I mean, it's hard to explicitly represent faults in the framework. I pretty much took the tack that from a hydrogeologic standpoint, any place where you had a fault, and assuming that there's no kind of sealing or conduits there, I pretty much decided to take the tack that any place where a fault was hydrologically significant, it would show an offset in the different hydrogeologic framework units. If they weren't significant, basically like say the fault is in the fine grain stuff, really it's not going to make that much different hydrologically. And again, there's some pretty good assumptions going on there, but I judge that there's so much uncertainty on some of these fault locations that I'd be introducing more uncertainty where it was already kind of iffy. I mean, and that's there would be people that would disagree with that approach. Does that answer your question, Jenny?
Yeah, no, I think that's reasonable given our current state of knowledge. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, especially some of those faults up in the foothills. I know some of the work up there at Squires and others, have made an argument for compartmentalization of the aquifer up there. But again, when you're doing a regional model, I don't think we should start off representing those. Now, it may be during calibration that we find it is an issue.
So this is Mark Porter from Brown and Caldwell. So you have like 4 hydrogeologic zones or units. I mean, is that correct?
Yes. And
are they all connected? I mean, some of them look disconnected from just this image that's showing here. And then the red, I mean, it varies vertically. So I guess what is your conceptualization of, hydraulic conductivity as you go deeper? Are those going to be the same hydraulic conductivities in the model, or are they going to possibly get, lower hydraulic conductivity as you go deeper? I mean, just what's your general conception of that?
Yeah, and I should have covered this. When we go back to these 4 hydrogeologic units, and we've got a ton of aquifer tests of various sort and quality for the Treasure Valley, mostly contained in consultants' reports. Some of those aquifer tests have been interpreted 3 or 4 times, and that goes into that account. you know, they may be interpreted, you know, based on different pairs of wells and sets of wells. And I looked at that whole data set and decided that it was just going to be tough to deal with. So I put a table, you know, just a standard table of hydraulic conductivity for the different deposits. So of course we're going to assign a higher hydraulic conductivity to these fluvial and alluvial deposits. These Pliocene and Miocene basalts are going to be somewhat lower. Our fine-grained lacustrine deposits are undoubtedly going to be the lowest, and then you know, finally our granitic and rhyolitic bedrock will, at least where it's represented in the model, will probably be the lowest. And this fits in with the general characteristics of the rocks. The way I think we're going to implement this is, you know, I showed you model layering and the fact that the framework units were so discontinuous, it was hard to base layering on that. So what we're going to do is we've defined the model layers, but we're going to assign zones within each model layer based on the framework. And, you know, that's one of the things that PES will be able to dink with. And so that's kind of how we're going at it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, it does. Yeah.
And then there's a question over in the chat window, Jim. I can read it out to you. So this is from another Jim. Could the 10-mile gravels be envisioned as an apron of coarse grain material originating in the Boise Mountains and draped over lake deposits in the basin? And
you know, I think you could probably call I mean, that's what Othberg pretty much came up with when he described the 10-mile gravels in I don't know, the whatever 6 episodes of deposition and terraces. So yeah, by and large, the 10-mile gravels are Boise River stuff. But I mean, we get to have problems in areas of the basin where we've got other high sands and gravels that didn't originate in the Boise River. So, you know, I think probably the 10-mile gravels, and to some extent, I think already are going to have that definition kind of change somewhat. One problem that we have in the Western Snake River Plain is that people have been dinking around with the geology since the King surveys in the 19th century, and very often there's units described that don't conform to the North American Stratigraphic Code. So we don't have a type section. You know, the descriptions are vague. And then when you had the paleontologists mucking around, they were more interested in the bones than the unit itself. So Hal Maldy kind of came out with a paper in the 60s that kind of tried to straighten that out. But, you know, I think it's going to take some concerted work to really bring some uniformity to this. And you know, this is what the IGS is starting, working on the Payette formation up in the Payette. Does that answer your question? Long answer to a short question.
he also asked another one, is if there's any ideas on the dating of the entrenchment of the Snake River Valley.
Well, yeah, pretty well, because I mean, that was, you know, well, when you say entrenchment, I wonder, do you mean the entrenchment like in the basalts, like around Twin Falls? I mean, we can date those to the Bonneville floods, and we can date those really pretty well. You know, Spence Wood and his pretty much complete paper describing the geologic history of the Western Snake River Plain. I mean, if you're talking about the entrenching when Lake Idaho, Lake Idaho began draining as it cut through the gap down by Hell's Canyon, we've got there's some paleontological evidence, fishes primarily, and other things that they can use to date the through flowing Snake River. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, he's unmuted. So Jim, if you have any other follow-up questions on that, feel free to jump in. So I have a question that's maybe more on just the logistics of things. You know, we've got quite a few students on the call and some other folks from Boise State. And I wonder, you know, if a student were going down the path of doing something like this themselves in a different location, you know, I know that the driller's logs was a crazy endeavor for you. Do you have any tips or tricks or paths not to go down that you might suggest to them?
Don't become a hydrogeologist. That would be the first advice. No, I mean, it's, you know, groundwater flow models, most of the work is actually gathering the data and then trying to figure out how to integrate it. You know, going back to the water budget, I mean, we could see that the seepage from the into the drains is a major source of outflow from the aquifer system, and we just didn't have good data on what those flows look like. So as part of the beginning of the project, we put in 10 real-time stream gauges on drains throughout the valley to gather that evidence that we can actually use in the model. So, you know, first of all, you have to do a really good search on what's out there. Try to anticipate, if you have the luxury of collecting new data, try to anticipate what needs to be collected. For the most part, we're at the point that the only canal that we're representing explicitly in the model is the New York Canal. The seepage from the canal system, it really gets to be a mess the farther you go from canal to ditch, and it's really, you know, we can typically tell what's being diverted into a district, you know, Nampa and Meridian, Irrigation District, whatever, and that's how we're handling it in the model, is kind of a lumped parameter. You know, if we had to go back, I would, and this is one thing that models are really good at, is telling you what you've missed and what data needs to be collected. You know, kind of like Christian's model showed that the drains were really important, so we collected that data for this one. But I think the next iteration, they're going to have to get better data on the New York Canal. So, you know, try to identify as best as you can what's out there. Stay organized. Set up a really good file structure and data sheets that kind of list what data you have, like on a specific subject. That's one thing I've done. Another thing I've done is I've started adding a tab at the beginning of all my spreadsheets. It essentially is the metadata for a rough metadata. It's not FGDC standard, but rough metadata for whatever data sets in that spreadsheet. And, you know, that's the kind of thing, laying down tracks for you when you forget what you're doing a month or two down the road, but also for anybody that comes after you and tries to pick it up after you. I don't know, Kendra, was that kind of what you're asking? I feel like I was.
Yeah, that was awesome. That's great advice. It's great to hear you say those things explicitly, because we often tell our students these kind of things, and so when it comes from somebody that's doing it in practice, it's proof that we're not just making it up.
Well, I've been involved in 3 models, 3 big, well, actually 4 big if you count the Middle Rio Grande, and you can see how much gray hair I have.
It is definitely no light task to organize data and keep it organized. And I think the metadata point, just laying down tracks for whoever picks up afterwards, is also really valuable. So we have a few more minutes. I might just give a few more seconds to see if there's anybody else that has another question before we go.
I had one question for Jim and then a comment for everybody. So Jim, you show in your hydrogeologic units diagram of the Lake Idaho silt and clays. And I saw that you described the lake deposits as fine-grained. And I just wanted to kind of verify with you that the entire Lake Idaho chunk there, you don't have any sand in there.
Kyle, if you look at this, you see over here on this right side, I kind of, and this is probably geology jargon that probably went over everybody's head, but over here to the side, I saw these alluvial fans and deltas, which are primarily sand. So that kind of shows these things interfingering within these finer grain deposits. And the same thing with these basalts over here, that's kind of how we show concurrent deposition. Does that make sense, Kyle?
Yeah, and so my comment is that you know, wherever we drill, every time we're going to do a production well, we do a test well, and we go down, you know, a good 1,000 feet or so, and we run into what I would call lake deposits. But there's a lot of beach on a lake, right? So there's a lot of cuttings that come off the solid separator that I would consider lake deposits, but they're really fine-grained sand. And I just wondered if that was taken into account. And then it made me think when somebody mentioned students and what they might be considering when they're looking at projects or modeling. And I thought, well, we missed a big opportunity. We just got done drilling one of our test wells, went 1,000 feet down, went through all these layers of, you know, what I would call lake deposits and alluvial deposits and clays and sands and fine sands and blue stuff and brown stuff. And I would encourage anybody that wants to see those cuttings to be in touch with me, I guess. Somebody, you can find my email. I think if you click on my name there, you can get my email, but otherwise I'm available on meridiancity.org website. But we do a test well almost every year out here. And so if there's students that want to see the cuttings that come out of these test wells in real time, I think there's a lot of opportunities there. Even on the production wells, you know, the cuttings come off of the solid separator on the drill rig, and I think there's maybe some opportunities out there that we haven't been taken advantage of.
Kyle's in charge of the Meridian water utilities, and so I mean certainly, you know, Meridian has drilled a lot of wells. They've got really good data sets. They've really gone about this right. So, you know, Kyle's done a good job on that.
That's great to hear, Kyle. I'll definitely pass that along to the other faculty as well, because I'm sure there would be some students that would be really interested in that opportunity.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I would, this Virginia, I would second that. It's something I noted in looking at well logs some years ago, that as good as some of the driller well logs are, having either a professional geologist or a student geologist do a somewhat better description would, you know, particularly if you've got a deep well like a city well, would be really worthwhile in getting those organized and preserved in an archive. Because I'm guessing, Jim, you're going to have to use one hydraulic conductivity and other parameters for each layer.
Well, yeah, we'll use zones within each layer, but I mean, you've got the problem from looking at what's going on in a 1 foot interval. You know, it may be switching back and forth and trying to create a model layer from that may be 200 feet thick. So I mean, there's generalization involved. But yeah, I mean, Kyle, you know, you're absolutely right. This is not a homogeneous. These are not homogeneous units. I typically refer to the hydrogeology as a tub of goo.
Well, we are right at 1 o'clock, so I just want to say thanks again, Jim, for a great presentation, and everyone for joining and all the great questions. And just a reminder that all the webinars that we are doing are now being recorded, and they are available on YouTube, which is linked through our website at idawra.org. And we are also, as Kathy mentioned at the beginning, we've started doing some interviews with water resources professionals around Idaho, and those recordings are up as well. So thanks again to everyone, and hopefully we'll be seeing you soon.